The city had two faces. By day, it was alive with the hum of busy commuters, honking cars, and the glimmer of storefronts promising luxury to those who could afford it. By night, the city was a different beast. A cold, indifferent maze where the forgotten huddled in shadows, clinging to life. For 12-year-old Ethan Collins, the night was his reality. Ethan's life had been a whirlwind of hardship since his mother, Lily, passed away when he was only 7. He had no memory of his father, only vague whispers from people who once knew his mother, hinting at a man who had abandoned them long before Ethan could walk. Now, Ethan roamed the streets with nothing but the clothes on his back and a heart hardened by survival. But Ethan wasn't entirely alone. He carried with him a crumpled cardboard box filled with a few precious items he had scavenged over the years, things that gave him a faint sense of belonging. The most important among them was a small, faded photograph of a young woman. It was the only image he had of his mother. The photograph wasn't something he had always carried. He had stumbled upon it during one of the worst nights of his life, a discovery that had changed everything. It had been raining for days, the kind of relentless downpour that soaked through layers of clothing and chilled you to the bone. Ethan was used to sleeping in doorways or under bridges, but on that particular night, even his usual spots offered no relief from the rain. Desperate and shivering, he had wandered into an abandoned building he had never dared to enter before. The building was decrepit, its walls covered in graffiti, its floors littered with broken glass and debris. Ethan treads carefully, his thin sneakers doing little to protect him from the sharp edges. As he searched for a dry corner to curl up in, his foot caught on something, sending him tumbling forward. "Stupid," he muttered to himself, wincing as he brushed dirt off his scraped palms. He glanced back to see what had tripped him, a battered old shoebox partially buried beneath a pile of rubble. Curiosity got the better of him. He pulled the shoebox free, brushing off the dust and cobwebs. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, and he opened it with cautious fingers, half expecting to find nothing but garbage. Instead, he found a small collection of items: a pressed flower, a locket, and a folded piece of paper. His heart pounded as he unfolded the paper and realized it was actually a photograph. The image was faded and creased, but he could still make out the face of a young woman with soft eyes and a radiant smile. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He recognized her instantly. It was the same woman from the fragmented stories people had told him. The woman who had held him as a baby, sung him to sleep, and loved him unconditionally. It was his mother. His hands trembled as he stared at the photograph, his vision blurred by tears he hadn't even realized were falling. For so long, he had been adrift, a nameless boy in a sea of strangers. But now, for the first time, he felt a connection to his past. Ethan clutched the photograph tightly, as though it were a lifeline. The rest of the shoebox's contents barely registered in his mind as he tucked the photograph into his jacket. That night, he curled up in the corner of the abandoned building, holding the image close to his chest. From that night onward, the photograph became Ethan's most prized possession. It was his anchor, a reminder that he had come from someone who had loved him deeply, even if that love had been stolen from him too soon. He carried it with him everywhere, wrapping it in scraps of cloth to protect it from the elements. Ethan often found himself wondering about his mother. What kind of person had she been? What had her laugh sounded like? Did she ever dream of a better life for him? These thoughts consumed him as he wandered through the streets, searching for food and shelter. But no matter how bleak things got, the photograph gave him a sliver of hope. It reminded him that he mattered to someone once. What he didn't know was that the photograph wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a key, a connection to a life he had never known, a life he was about to stumble into in the most unexpected way. That rainy night in the abandoned building had set the stage for a journey that would change everything, though Ethan couldn't have known it then. All he knew was that he would never let go of the picture. It was his mother's face, her memory, and the spark of hope that kept him moving forward in a world that had all but forgotten him. The man in the photograph, as Ethan would later discover, was Lucas Grant. He was no ordinary businessman. He was one of the most influential figures in the city, the kind of man whose name was splashed across billboards and whose interviews dominated business magazines. Lucas was the CEO of Grant Innovations, a company that revolutionized technology. To the outside world, he was a symbol of success and power, the epitome of someone who had everything. But Lucas's life wasn't as picture-perfect as it seemed. Behind the polished exterior and confident smile, he was a man haunted by his past, a past he had buried beneath layers of ambition and wealth. For years, he had carried a secret, one he dared not share with anyone, the guilt of abandoning the only people who had truly loved him. For Ethan, none of this was known as he stood at the gates of Lucas's sprawling estate. His hands trembled as he stared up at the towering iron gates, which seemed as cold and unwelcoming as the world that had so often turned its back on him. He debated turning away, the weight of self-doubt creeping in. Who was he to walk into the life of someone so powerful, so untouchable? But something in him pushed forward, the same spark of courage that had kept him alive on the streets. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed, and Ethan waited. He imagined someone dismissing him outright, telling him to leave without a second glance. But to his surprise, the gates creaked open, and a butler appeared, his sharp suit immaculate, his gaze scrutinizing. "Yes?" the butler asked, his tone measured and clipped. Ethan swallowed hard and held up the wallet. "I found this. I think it belongs to Mr. Grant." The butler's eyes narrowed as he took the wallet, flipping it open to check its contents. For a moment, Ethan thought he might accuse him of stealing it, but instead, the butler gave a curt nod. "Wait here," he said, stepping aside to let Ethan into the vast marble-floored foyer. Ethan shuffled in, his scuffed sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. He stood awkwardly, feeling out of place among the luxurious surroundings. The chandeliers sparkled above him, their crystals catching the sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Portraits of Lucas hung on the walls, each one capturing his sharp jawline and piercing gaze, exuding authority. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. Ethan's stomach churned with unease. He didn't belong here. He could feel the weight of the butler's disapproving stare, the judgment etched into every corner of this pristine home. Finally, footsteps echoed down the grand staircase, and Lucas Grant appeared. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his presence commanding yet restrained. His sharp eyes scanned Ethan, pausing on the photograph still clutched in the boy's hand. "You found my wallet," Lucas said, his voice calm but edged with curiosity. "Yes," Ethan replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Lucas walked closer, his gaze flickering between the wallet and Ethan. "And the photograph. You kept it?" Ethan hesitated, unsure how to explain. I saw her. The woman in the picture. She looks like my mom." Lucas's expression froze. The confident mask he wore cracked for just a moment as he stared at Ethan. His breathing hitched, and he quickly composed himself, though his hands trembled slightly. "What's your name, kid?" Lucas asked, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. "Ethan," he said, clutching his mother's photograph tighter. Lucas's face paled, and for a brief moment, he looked as though the weight of the world had fallen on his shoulders. His voice broke when he finally spoke. "Ethan Collins?" Ethan's heart raced. "How do you know my last name?" Lucas staggered back, gripping the edge of a nearby table for support. His mind raced as memories of Lily Collins flooded back. The woman he had loved and left behind. The woman he had searched for in vain after his father's death. And now, standing before him, was the boy he had always wondered about. "Ethan, Lucas started but faltered. The words wouldn't come. The butler, sensing the tension, stepped forward. "Sir, is everything all right?" Lucas waved him away, his eyes never leaving Ethan's. "Leave us, please." The butler hesitated but obeyed, leaving the two of them alone in the cavernous room. Lucas took a deep breath and knelt down, leveling his gaze with Ethan's. "Ethan, this isn't a coincidence. I need to tell you something, but I don't know where to begin." Ethan's brows furrowed, his grip tightening on the photograph. "Tell me what? Do you know my mom, Lily?" Lucas nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. "Yes, Ethan. I knew her. I loved her. And I think I'm your father." The room seemed to close in around Ethan. His head spun as he tried to process the words. "My father?" he echoed, his voice shaking. Lucas nodded, his own voice breaking. "I never wanted to leave you or your mom. I was forced to make a terrible choice, and I've regretted it every day since. I searched for you, Ethan, but I was too late. I didn't know where to look." Ethan's heart pounded. Anger, confusion, and disbelief swirled within him. "You left us?" he spat, his voice rising. "You left my mom to raise me alone? You let us end up on the streets?" Lucas flinched at the words, the weight of his guilt crushing him. "I was wrong, Ethan. I made the biggest mistake of my life, and I've spent every day trying to fix it. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to make things right. Please, let me try." Ethan stared at him, his emotions warring within. Part of him wanted to run, to reject this man who had abandoned him, but another part, the part that longed for a family, for love, hesitated. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncertain. For the first time in years, Ethan saw a glimmer of something he hadn't dared to hope for, the possibility of belonging. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Ethan said, his voice trembling. Lucas nodded, his expression filled with sorrow. "I understand, but I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of your forgiveness." The tension lingered, but a fragile thread of connection had been formed. For better or worse, their journey had begun. Lucas Grant sat alone in his sprawling mansion, the weight of his wealth and success feeling heavier than ever. His fortune, built on years of tireless work and calculated risks, had brought him power and influence, but at a cost he could never fully measure. The house was filled with priceless artwork, gleaming chandeliers, and the latest technologies, but it was hollow, empty of the warmth that came with family. That night, as Lucas stared into the flickering flames of his grand fireplace, his thoughts drifted to the past he had spent years trying to bury. Ethan's face, so strikingly similar to Lily's, had torn open wounds he thought had healed. Memories came rushing back, vivid and unrelenting, dragging him into the painful truths he had spent years avoiding. Lucas had been a different man when he met Lily Bennett. She was a whirlwind of energy and kindness, her laughter infectious and her dreams boundless. He had fallen for her quickly, captivated by her ability to find beauty in the simplest things. But their love was not without its challenges. Lucas came from an influential family, the Grants, who were as cold as they were wealthy. His father, Henry Grant, was a stern, calculating man who saw emotions as weaknesses and viewed people like chess pieces to be moved for advantage. When Lucas introduced Lily to his family, their disapproval was swift and merciless. "She's not one of us," Henry had said with a sneer. "She'll drag you down, Lucas. You have a legacy to uphold. End this nonsense, or I'll cut you off." Lucas, young and desperate to prove himself, had buckled under the pressure. His father's threats were not idle. They came with the weight of a man who controlled the keys to Lucas's future. And so, one fateful evening, Lucas made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He met Lily in the small apartment they shared and broke the news, his words stumbling over the enormity of what he was saying. "I can't stay, Lily," he said, avoiding her tear-filled gaze. "My father, he's giving me no choice." Lily's voice trembled with anger and heartbreak. "No choice? Lucas, we're supposed to be a team. How can you just walk away?" "I'm doing this for us," he insisted weakly. "I'll come back when things are stable, I promise." But Lily knew better. She knew the man she had fallen in love with was being swallowed by the expectations of a world she could never belong to. When Lucas walked out that night, he left behind more than just Lily. He left behind the life they had dreamed of building together, and the child growing inside her, a secret she hadn't yet found the courage to share. Lily raised Ethan on her own, refusing to let Lucas's abandonment define their lives. She poured all her love and energy into her son, working long hours at multiple jobs to ensure he had what little she could provide. She told Ethan stories of his father, but she painted Lucas in a kinder light than he deserved. "Your father loved us," she would say, her voice soft and wistful. "He just lost his way." But life wasn't kind to Lily. The endless strain of working and raising a child alone began to take its toll. When Ethan was just 7 years old, Lily fell ill. At first, she brushed off the symptoms: persistent fatigue, shortness of breath, and the occasional dizzy spell. She couldn't afford to be sick, but as the months passed, her condition worsened, and by the time she sought medical help, it was too late. The day she died was etched into Ethan's memory with brutal clarity. He had been sitting by her bedside in the small, overcrowded hospital room, clutching her hand as she struggled to breathe. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "promise me you'll stay strong. You're my greatest treasure, and I'll always be with you." Tears streamed down Ethan's face as he nodded. "I promise, Mom." When Lily took her final breath, Ethan's world shattered. He was left alone, clutching the photograph of her that he would carry with him for years to come, a beacon of love in an otherwise harsh world. Sitting in his mansion, Lucas now knew none of this. The years following his departure had been consumed by his father's relentless demands, his own ambitions, and the emptiness he tried to fill with success. He had searched for Lily once Henry was no longer in control of his life, but by then she had disappeared, leaving no trace. It wasn't until years later, when Lucas hired a private investigator, that he learned the devastating truth. The report came with cold, unfeeling words. Lily Collins, deceased, survived by one son, Ethan Collins, current whereabouts unknown. Lucas had read those words over and over, each time feeling the weight of his choices crushing him. He had failed Lily, and now he was failing the son he had never met. The guilt was unbearable, but it also ignited a determination in him. He had to find Ethan. He had to make things right. When Ethan returned Lucas's wallet and the truth of their connection came to light, it felt like fate had given Lucas a second chance. But the road ahead was not an easy one. "Do you even know what we went through after you left?" Ethan had shouted during one of their early confrontations. "She worked herself to death trying to give me a life. And you? Where were you? Sitting in this mansion, counting your money?" Lucas had no defense, no excuses. "I was a coward," he admitted, his voice shaking. "I made choices I can never undo, but Ethan, please, let me try to make amends." Ethan's anger was fierce, but beneath it lay a deep well of pain and longing. He wanted to hate Lucas, but a part of him also wanted to believe in the father he had never known. Alone in his study that evening, Lucas stared at the photograph Ethan had returned to him, the same one he had once given to Lily. It was creased and worn from years of being held, but the love in Lily's eyes was still as clear as ever. "I'm sorry, Lily," Lucas whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I failed you, but I won't fail him. I promise you that." Lucas knew redemption wouldn't come easily, but for the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. He had been given a chance to reconnect with Ethan, and he was determined not to squander it. This was his chance to honor Lily's memory, to be the father Ethan deserved, and to finally begin the long, painful process of healing the wounds he had caused. It was a daunting journey, but for the first time, Lucas was ready to face it head-on. The days following the discovery of their bond were a whirlwind of emotions for both Ethan and Lucas. Their shared history was a fragile bridge spanning years of pain and separation, and neither knew quite how to cross it. Yet, even in their awkward silences and tentative interactions, there was a yearning, a need to make things right, to fill the voids in each other's lives. Ethan's new life was unlike anything he had ever imagined. He no longer woke to the icy chill of the streets or the gnawing ache of hunger. Instead, he awoke to the soft warmth of sunlight filtering through the curtains of his new room. The bed was enormous, the blankets plush, and the air carried the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee from the kitchen below. But even in the comfort of his new surroundings, Ethan couldn't shake the unease that clung to him like a shadow. For Lucas, watching Ethan struggle to adjust was a constant reminder of the years they had lost. He knew better than to push too hard, but he was determined to show Ethan that he wasn't alone anymore. Small gestures, a favorite snack left on the counter, a book about robotics, which Ethan had shown interest in, were his way of saying, "I'm here for you," even when words failed him. The morning sun streamed through the windows, bathing the dining room in warm light. Lucas stood at the counter, nervously flipping pancakes. He had spent years commanding boardrooms and making billion-dollar decisions. Yet the idea of sitting down to breakfast with his son left him feeling utterly out of his depth. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his expression guarded as he surveyed the table laden with pancakes, fresh fruit, and syrup. "What's all this?" he asked, suspicion lacing his tone. "Breakfast," Lucas replied, attempting a smile. "I thought we could eat together. Pancakes were one of your mom's favorites." Ethan hesitated, his fingers brushing the edge of a chair. The mention of his mother softened his expression, though only slightly. "She used to make them every Sunday," he said quietly. Lucas nodded, encouraged by this small opening. "I remember. She called them happy cakes." He chuckled nervously. "I can't promise mine will be as good as hers, but I tried." Ethan sat down, still wary but curious. They ate in silence at first, the only sounds the clink of cutlery and the occasional chirping of birds outside. Lucas broke the silence cautiously. "Your mom used to tell me stories about her dreams for you. She always said you'd grow up to do something amazing." Ethan looked up, his expression unreadable. "She just wanted me to be happy," he said, his voice steady but tinged with sorrow. "And are you?" Lucas asked softly. Ethan paused, his fork hovering mid-air. "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't really know what that feels like." The words hit Lucas like a punch to the gut. He wanted to say something, anything, to make it better, but he knew this wasn't the time for empty promises. Instead, he simply said, "I hope we can figure it out together." Ethan didn't respond, but the fact that he stayed and finished his meal felt like a small victory. Determined to bridge the gap between them, Lucas proposed a trip to see the neighborhood where Ethan had spent much of his life. "I want to see where you've been," he said one evening. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "It's not exactly a tourist spot." "Because it's part of your story," Lucas replied. "And I want to understand it." Reluctantly, Ethan agreed. The next morning, they drove in Lucas's sleek black car to the rough streets Ethan had once called home. The stark contrast between Lucas's world and Ethan's was glaring, and Lucas felt the weight of his privilege with every passing block. As they walked, Ethan pointed out places that held significance to him: a crumbling alley where he had once slept, a corner store where the owner occasionally slipped him free snacks, and a dilapidated park where he had spent hours imagining a better life. At one point, Ethan stopped in front of a weathered brick building. "This was my mom's favorite cafe," he said. "She'd save up for weeks just to take me here for a hot chocolate." Lucas could see the emotion flickering in Ethan's eyes. "Did you like it?" he asked gently. Ethan shrugged. It wasn't about the hot chocolate. It was about her. She made everything feel special, even when we had nothing. Lucas swallowed hard, guilt gnawing at him. "She was an incredible woman," he said, his voice heavy with regret. They continued walking until they reached a small encampment where several homeless individuals were gathered. Ethan greeted a few of them by name, exchanging quick updates and inside jokes. Lucas watched in awe as Ethan interacted with the group. Despite everything he had endured, Ethan had retained a kindness and resilience that Lucas could only admire. "This is Mr. Fred," Ethan said, introducing an older man with a scruffy beard and kind eyes. "He used to give me extra bread when I couldn't find food." Fred extended a hand to Lucas. "You're the dad, huh?" he said, his tone neutral but observant. "I am," Lucas replied, shaking Fred's hand. "Thank you for looking out for Ethan." Fred chuckled. "It's the other way around, really. That boy's got a heart bigger than most people I've met." As they walked away, Lucas couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. "You helped them," he said to Ethan. Ethan shrugged, his hands stuffed into his pockets. "They helped me, too." Back at the mansion, Lucas continued his efforts to understand Ethan by immersing himself in his son's interests. One evening, he found Ethan hunched over a small pile of electronics, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What are you working on?" Lucas asked, sitting down beside him. "It's just a little project," Ethan replied, holding up a half-assembled robot. "I found some parts in a junkyard, and I'm trying to make it work." Lucas leaned in, genuinely fascinated. "Can I help?" Ethan looked at him skeptically. "Do you know anything about robotics?" "No," Lucas admitted with a chuckle. "But I can learn." To Ethan's surprise, Lucas stayed. Together, they tinkered with the robot late into the night, sharing ideas and laughing at their mistakes. By the end of the evening, Ethan realized he was actually enjoying his father's company. The bond between Ethan and Lucas grew stronger as they began to share more of their lives with each other. Lucas took Ethan to a robotics workshop, where Ethan's natural curiosity shone. He asked a million questions, his eyes lighting up as he tinkered with small circuits and gears. "You've got a real talent for this," Lucas said, watching with pride as Ethan assembled a basic robot. Ethan grinned. "Maybe I could build something cool one day." "You can build anything you set your mind to," Lucas assured him. In turn, Ethan introduced Lucas to some of the simple joys he had found during his years on the streets. They visited a park where Ethan had once spent hours watching families play. This time, Ethan and Lucas joined in, kicking a soccer ball back and forth. For the first time, Ethan felt a flicker of what it might mean to have a father. The more Lucas learned about Ethan's life, the more determined he became to be the father his son deserved. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, he felt like they were making progress. On another day, Lucas made another attempt to connect. One evening, he brought out an old photo album. "Your mother loved keeping memories," he explained as he handed the album to Ethan. Ethan flipped through the pages, his eyes widening at the sight of photos he had never seen before. There was his mother, younger and full of life, her arms wrapped around a much younger Lucas. She looks so happy, Ethan said softly. She was, Lucas replied, his voice heavy with regret. And I was a fool to ever let her go. Ethan looked up at him, his eyes searching. Do you think she'd forgive you? Lucas hesitated, his throat tightening. I hope so, he said at last. But what matters most to me now is earning your forgiveness. On the desk was a stack of papers and a photograph of Lily. I've been working on a way to honor your mom's memory, Lucas explained. A scholarship in her name for kids who need a second chance. Ethan stared at the photo, his throat tightening. She'd like that, he said quietly. Lucas placed a hand on his son's shoulder. She'd be proud of you, Ethan. You've got her strength, her kindness, and I'm proud of you too. For the first time, Ethan allowed himself to believe those words. It was a small step, but it felt like the beginning of something real, a connection that might finally bridge the years of pain and separation. The scholarship became a project that brought them closer. They brainstormed ideas, met with community leaders, and even visited shelters to talk to children about their dreams. The experience was transformative for both of them, giving Ethan a sense of purpose and Lucas a way to honor Lily's memory. By the time the first scholarship was awarded, Ethan and Lucas were no longer just strangers navigating an awkward relationship. They were family. Ethan thrived in his new life, excelling in school and finding joy in the opportunities he had never dared to dream of. Lucas, in turn, found redemption in being the father Ethan needed and deserved. On the anniversary of Lily's passing, they visited her grave together. Ethan placed a bouquet of her favorite flowers on the headstone, while Lucas spoke softly, his words filled with gratitude and love. She'd be proud of us, Ethan said, his voice steady. Lucas placed a hand on his son's shoulder. She'd be proud of you, Ethan. You're everything good in this world. In the quiet of the cemetery, with the sun setting in a blaze of orange and gold, they stood side by side. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a new beginning, a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bond of family.